Thanks for coming back. We have the second episode of our Inventing Knowledge podcast. This is from the Center for Interacting Minds, Societies and Environments at Nicholas Copernicus University. Today I'm talking with Francesco Trupia. He is a political philosopher. He got his PhD at Sofia University in Bulgaria, where he also did a master on intercultural relations and a bachelor in political science. Tell us, what are you working on? What kind of things do you do?
First of all, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for coming on.
And well, you described me very well. I work in the field of political philosophy, mainly in the so-called post-communist Europe, so Eastern Europe, moving from the Balkans to the South Caucasus and the region overall. Basically, as you said, I have a PhD in political philosophy, and I focus on the legacy of Antonio Gramsci. I'm Italian originally, so I'm much interested in studying the perspective from the ground, of course. That's why I moved to Eastern Europe. I got my PhD in Bulgaria, but I also worked in other countries of the region, like in Armenia and Kosovo. In Serbia, and I'm fascinated by the post-communist transition, how democratization is happening within these countries. And as you said, I focus now at the Copernicus University here as a postdoc fellow in the issues of memory, which is extremely important. You know, after the 1945, in Europe we got a memory discourse over Europe. And after the collapse of communism, Europe started to deal with new memories, which are deeply rooted in the history of communism. And, I'm fascinated by the nexus between the post-1945 memory discourse in Europe and the new wave of memories that are arriving in Europe and we are trying to come to terms with.
What are the different currents that produce these memories and the different conflicting opinions and these sorts of things, please?
Well, let me get these questions on two sides. First of all, on a general level, like the Second World War has given to Europe a certain memory discourse, which was the discourse of liberation from Nazi fascism in Europe. So also in Western Europe, the so-called Western Europe, the European part of the old continent, which was not under socialism and under communism, certain political figures and certain political environment were looking at the memory discourse even with some kind of fascination, right? The liberation of Eastern Europe from the Nazi regimes and so on and so forth. So we were completely sure about, who was guilty of committing, the Holocaust, for instance, and the memory discourse was constructed around those events. After the collapse of communism, Europe started to understand, especially in this Europeanizing project eastward, that there were many memories, including also some human rights abuses or violation of human rights in general against minorities, against segments of societies that were systematically repressed during communism, and they started to enter the memory discourse in Europe. For instance, I'm currently working on, this is the second part of the questions, of your questions I'm trying to reply. I'm working, for instance, on the assimilation policy during communist Bulgaria, during the 80s, against the ethnic Turks and Muslims. This is actually very interesting, not only because not many people know about what happened in Bulgaria during those times, but it also challenges the idea and the memory discourse in Europe when it comes to Muslim population and Turkish population, which the core Europe has always rejected as part of Europe. So you have this kind of specific perspectives that are overlapping between each other, and dealing with them sometimes it could be extremely complicated. At the same time, this is something that cannot be only approached from Eastern Europe, from Western Europe. This kind of categories, in my opinion, don't make sense. Maybe geographically they do, but we are talking about the European memory discourse. And of course, going back to the beginning of my answer, when you have the post-1945 and the post-1980-89, you have certain memories that are going through certain, how can I say, reevaluation. So also those part and those Western European thinkers looking with fascination towards Eastern Europe, they have to come to terms with something that happened during the communist time. This is actually interesting, not only for the discourse of memory, but also the discourse of politics. Just to conclude, we have one of the most debated issues in the European Union in comparing Nazism and communism on the same level. It was something not acceptable, for instance, during the 50s or during the 60s, especially for some political thinkers in Western Europe. Now it's more likely to be accepted.
Interesting. So we're talking about basically how we remember historical events in the past and conflicting opinions about what those historical events mean, what they were, etc. Yeah, that's the memory discourse.
And also how they are framed. Actually, it's extremely important.
Yeah.
Going back to the case of Bulgaria, for instance, in the country every year they celebrate the commemoration of the victims of communism, the 1st of February. But at the same time, in the places of memory, in Sofia downtown, you don't have much legacy of the assimilation policy towards the Turkish and the Muslim heritage or the Turkish people in general during communist time. Why? Because this is deeply rooted in the national culture of the country. It goes back to a certain policy of nativization of communist regimes, which was kind of widespread in Eastern Europe. And also it's very important on a political ground, because we talk about not just inclusion of memories, but also inclusion of identities, which means in turn inclusion of the people who hold and carry out this kind of burden from the past, these memories. So also my research is concerned with the post-memory. So not only the generation who went through assimilation policies, violation of human rights, they have been violated on a judicial level, but also those people, so the post-memory generation. So those people who have been growing up in families where these memories have been circulating on a private life, but not on a public discourse. And also you have yet another intersectional aspect, the private life and the public life, and how certain memories and identities and knowledge are framed in both spheres of interest, let's say.
Okay, and the goal is to kind of bring those private memories to the public?
Well, as you said, as a political philosopher, I don't give answers, I raise questions.
Okay. And
critical questions for me are much more interesting for challenging the status quo. So wherever there is, this is the task of philosophy after all. The philosophy has to challenge the taboo topics in society. So even though I have been working in these years also in policy projects, where we give recommendations on how to deal with certain sensitive issues in the political sphere, let's say that I'm currently trying to debunk certain myths, not only on a national level, Bulgarian, Kosovo, or Armenian, Ukrainian, whatever, but also on an European level, which is actually something much more interesting.
And for an example, what would be a myth that you're debunking?
Well, the role of Islam in Europe, I think this is something extremely important, especially because I think it's very sensitive right now. We deal in the European context with the Muslim diaspora, and most of the time we perceive the Muslim diaspora like the Muslim migration, or the coming of refugees and newcomers, from Asia, from the Middle East, as something other to Europe. But in this kind of reflection, let's say, the European reflections, we have a process of othering. So we other the other. Because, they don't belong to Europe, they are just coming here because they are economic migrants. But in this kind of reflection, as I said before, we forget that there are Muslim people coming from Europe. They are from Europe. Imagining, for example, the European Union right now is trying to enlarge the project of the European Union towards the East. And sooner or later, we are going to have certain countries such as Bosnia and Herzegovina, Albania, or Kosovo, or also Bulgaria, who is already in the European Union, whose 10% of the population is belonging to Turkic or Muslim background and heritage. So we have already the so-called European Muslims. And we have also those European Muslims of second and third generation, people who were born and raised in Europe, and they all the time navigate between, their everyday dilemma. They come from Muslim families who are not understood as Europeans, but they are Europeans because they were born in Europe and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So this is something, it's a myth to debunk in terms of, understanding how certain identities have been historically and systematically discarded from the European canon, while they were still present within the European canon. Not only something that concerns the East, let's say, but also the West. I come from Sicily, basically, and Sicily has been dominated for many centuries by Arabs, and, Islam was there, but also think about the southern part of Spain, for instance, which is one of the most touristic destinations for many Europeans. Yeah. The history of what I've been talking about, is there. You don't need to look for it up somewhere else.
What are your main projects here at the NCU? Like, what would you say you're working on?
I'm right now. I'm conducting interviews with Turkish and with Turkish people from Bulgaria, living in Bulgaria, and I'm questioning them about the quality of their memories. What do they know about the assimilation campaign during the 80s? And it's interesting because they were not born during those events, but they still have memories because these memories, as I said before, have been circulating within the families. Or most of the time, I'm questioning them how they came across these memories. I mean, because most of the time, since you don't have experience, there should be some objects or some photo or some space or place of memory where you start realizing that your family went through this and that event and so on and so forth. So it's fascinating to understand also certain aspect of the Bulgarian society. Of course, because my main project is about, the post-communist Bulgarian memory, let's say.
Is that your main interest? I also wanted to ask you about what are these items, please? What would you say your main interest is?
The main interest is that, after communist Bulgaria didn't really officialize, a commission on communism and communist policies, and have in mind that many of the political figures on a national level, they come from the communist experience. This is something extremely common in Eastern Europe. Communist leaders have been recycling themselves, especially on a local level, just remaking themselves in a position to keep power and to keep their own positions for ruling over the society. Yeah. In Eastern Europe, we have the problem of oligarchs who are mainly everywhere. Of course, I don't want to depict the Eastern Europe as, the non-democratic region. This is something that we have. Unfortunately, we live in a time of liberal democracies, right? But what is interesting in Bulgaria is that many people don't know what really happened during those days, especially the young generation. And the post-memory, as the term used by Marine Hirsch, who is I think the most known figure in academia who introduced this topic. She introduced it for the studying of the post-memory generation of the Holocaust, so Jewish people who are basically around the world, not only based in Israel or in Europe, but also like in the US, for instance, and how these kind of post-memories can tell us about certain things that have not settled yet. So when I'm interviewing people from Bulgaria, unfortunately we live in time of pandemic, so I have to do it over Skype or Zoom. Most of the time they reflect on the fact that their memories have been constructed at home, while the grandfathers were discussing about certain things, or at school, for instance. This is a long story related to to the curricula that the Bulgarian in the Bulgarian schools are used, especially in literature, in history. Most of the time, these people told me that about the events that they were listening to at home, they didn't have much space to discuss them at school, because there was almost nothing on the history textbooks, for instance. and now it's something that is appearing and trying to find space in the society, not only at school. There are some cultural events that are raising awareness about what happened, but still this process is still ongoing. And we don't need to talk only to those people who have been, how to say, discriminated and went through terrible things during the 80s in Bulgaria, but also we have to talk with the post-memory generation, with those people who have been growing up in Bulgaria in this kind of limbo, in this liminal space between the private and then the public. The private where they have memories, and the public where they don't have memories displayed everywhere. Most of the time, if you go to Sofia, you go through the country, Bulgaria, you have many communist heritage still, in the country. Like, I'm interested in how people reflect on them and how they deal with them. What is the storytelling, not even touching academic stuff, but what is the storytelling around these memories? Are the young generation aware of what this monument stands for and what is the meaning behind it? Because it says a lot also about the political life which is lived, and why, for instance, Bulgarian youth doesn't engage in politics, even though the city center is very political. It's the reflection of the past in the present for the generation to come in the future as well. So you have also this interesting aspect, the future, the present and the past that are somehow interconnected between each other.
And what is it in particular about the Bulgarian case that makes you interested in that? Like, I feel like as you're from Italy and you did a PhD in Bulgaria, I don't know how long you were in Bulgaria, but do you know better than them? Do you feel that you know better than them what happened?
Well, I mean, since I spent a couple of years studying on the issues, maybe I might know more than them. But most of the time, these are memories that are not verbalized. So it doesn't mean that I know more or less than someone else. But it's about that, it's about speaking up, which at the end of the day, it's an issue in the democratic arena. You need to speak up in order to participate and to contribute to democracy, to democratic space. If you don't do it, everything is silenced, and you don't really have space to discuss about these issues. But even though it's not verbalized, certain places of memories, they have the memory there. It's there. You just need to discover it and to start verbalizing it. It's a matter of language as well, in order to let it introduce in the public debate. Once again, it's an inconspicuous phenomenon, yet extremely relevant for the Bulgarian society, because also Bulgaria as a part of Eastern Europe, whatever it means, these are countries that are depicted as countries still in transition. They're transiting. For many, they don't know the direction to where they are transiting, and what is the final stage of this transition time. For many, it looks like an endless transition, but the discourse on memory and on politics and on recognition of certain identities is still part of the democratic transition. And if something is not settled yet, it's time to discuss. Never too late from this point of view. So what makes Bulgaria unique? You have many commonalities with other Eastern European countries, but also something unique is that while in the post-Yugoslavian countries you have still people discussing about issues of the past, in Bulgaria there are many people who refrain from talking openly about those events. Sorry?
Is that true? Yeah, I don't know actually.
Like people are more likely to discuss about other things. But also there are other people who discuss about this and have been discussing, have been researching about these issues. But once again, we go back to Gramsci, about the hegemony and subalternity. If your voice is subaltern, so it's not recognized yet, you have to do something in order to make it recognizable. And doable as well for the generation to come. Because of course, a problem and a mistake is that, overwhelming the young generation with information and events. There are many things through many activities where you can engage young people. No formal education is one of the best instruments for engaging people in order to let them be aware of what happened. And of course, it's not just a matter.
Who determines what happened?
Well, I think it's a matter of historians. First of all, we have archives to have access to. So I think that archive work is extremely important for doing that. It's interesting because you said like who is supposed to create this kind of narrative.
That's kind of what you study. Yeah?
Yeah.
I feel like.
Well, I mean, in general, we do have data available for us. If you Google some events, in Eastern Europe, you can find a lot of information, a lot of literature work, or scholars who have been delving into this kind of specific issues. But at the same time, you have this kind of discrepancy. You have a lot of work, nobody talks about it, or it's somehow other issues are overwhelming them, and sometimes it seems to be more like a blaming activity. So people feel to be accused of having done something that they don't really remember or they don't really deal with anymore because there are other kind of problems. This is also that happens among the marginalized communities, who don't really talk about what happened in the past because they have to deal with something more important nowadays. So you have also this kind of division between those people who are really into studying this kind of stuff, and for me one of the paradox is that am I supposed to speak on behalf of a community I don't belong to? This is exactly. This is what it does, and so that's why I like engaging with them. I like talking with them and asking what possible permission to use their knowledge, and if my work is worthy of note and of being published, for instance, in their eyes. So far I have got positive answers, and the fact that someone is talking about them, for them it's also a matter of recognition, not only on a national level but on the European level, because there are outsiders. So I'm neither Bulgarian nor a member of those communities. So for them it's about someone is talking about it. So nothing.
Do you speak Bulgarian, for instance?
I'm working on it, so I can understand.
Do you do the interviews in Bulgarian or in English?
Well, I touch upon sensitive issues, so I'm more confident with English. So I don't want to to be misunderstood or to ask something in Bulgarian that could be misleading. Because after all, the person you are interviewing, but you don't know the history about it. That's why you are interviewing. And
does everyone know English in Bulgaria?
Actually, yeah, it's a very widespread, especially among the young generation. Bulgarian language is not spoken. It's not a mainstream language. Let's say it's not like among the Slavic languages. It's not like Russian, right, where you can go in many different places and people, especially the old generation, speaks Russian. So Bulgarian, the young Bulgarians, they have learned English in order to communicate, and in general. I think that especially in the urban areas, English is quite
Normal.
Yeah, kind of normal. I have to say so. Yeah.
Sounds good. Do you think it affects your results at all? Sorry, I'm being a little critical.
Ooh.
I mean, if you don't talk to the old generation, do you think they are the ones?
Well, but even if they have some more political views on the events, that happens sometimes. I have to say that post memory is more political than memory. Why? Because in my opinion, when you have memory of some events, you have experience, and you have to deal with those experiences. Maybe I'm asking about experiences you don't really want to remember. You just want to go over them.
Yeah.
Right?
That might be why they don't talk about it.
Yeah. Most of the time this is the case. Also because you have some cooperation, partnership. I mean, it's very complicated. It becomes immediately political. And that's why the political here is kept away from the discussion, because once it enters the political sphere, everything is going to be, it can be compromised. It can compromise figures, historical figures, political figures. But post-memory, actually, it's more interesting because it's extremely political. Because it's about the narrative that you create in order to justify some historical events. And if you have if your family has been suffering from those events, you get politicized. Your memory is not based on experiences because you were not born, maybe, but basically that experience becomes political in the way that you have to take side. Even remembering is a political action.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of politics. That's why most of the time we talk about memory politics, because commemorating, so memorizing a certain event with a specific narrative, it's a matter of political construction and how you basically frame it.
Yeah. Hegemonic.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Or perhaps could be hegemonic within the subaltern groups. Most of the time, those people who speak on behalf of a community which was targeted or discriminated, they speak in praise of the community they belong to. Most of the time, they are not recognized by the other people within the community. Why? Because they are already the official voices, and what is official sometimes, it could be could spread a distorted version of what happened in the past. One of the things that I would like to share, actually, many Turkish people I've interviewed, they have grandmothers and grandparents who have been helping the communist officials to implement this assimilation policy in Bulgaria. The assimilation policy was happening through name changing. So they were changing the name in order to let them become Bulgarian or more Bulgarian, let's say. It's a long story, historically speaking. But they come across this dilemma because now they remember when they said, yes, we're going to change our name, nothing else is going to happen. But then they knew what happened and what have been suffering from. So they have this kind of cognitive dissonance, to remember something they have contributed to. So it's, it's like remembering something bad that happened to you in the past, but at the end of the day, you have also contributed. Also, you have helped some communist officials to change the name of other people from your community in order to pacify the situation, but basically the situation was not going to be pacified. Actually, it was going to be even, to worsen and to escalate in a negative way. So the post-memory is giving to me the idea that those people who have been targeted by those policy assimilation campaigns, they have to deal a lot with the problem of memorizing and commemorating certain events. Mm-hmm. That's why many say that it's very difficult to talk about these things, and most of the time they avoid talking about these things.
Sounds good. Sounds interesting. And what's the future of your work? Do you have a big vision, something you're trying to achieve, a paper that you want to write, a book that you want to write in the future?
I'm
you don't
right
have to tell
now
us your main project maybe, but just the general.
Well, in general, I'm willing to work in this intersection between politics.
What would you like to achieve with your career?
Working in academia is, for a postdoc is always, the big dream. But most of the time, academic space is shrinking more and more. So I'm also thinking that, and this is, in my opinion, something that academics have to realize and to come to terms with, that there is not only academia as a space where you can contribute. There is the civil society over there, and most of the time, we have to bring knowledge from academia outside academia. Yeah. Otherwise, it becomes just philosophical exercise for telling and writing about all the books that you've been reading, but at the end of the day, it's not teleological. It doesn't have an aim, a final aim. So if your research can contribute to the society, this is even better. This is my main goal at the end of the day. I don't know if in academia or in civil society or some other organizations, but the most important thing is actually to bring together people, not only from academia, so people who basically write papers, monographs, books in general, but also those people who are the target group to whom this knowledge, are going to be handed. So, in general, we need to think about the fact that you should also look beyond academia, not only within academia. Mm-hmm. Academia could be an option, of course, could be like a space where you can keep working, but it cannot limit yourself.
But I'm not saying your career or the trajectory of your career. What do you want to achieve with your work? Maybe
in terms of what? In terms of
better
research outcomes or?
Yeah, well, so maybe something like more identification for the subaltern opinions in general.
Well, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, there are not only like on a European level, but also in Bulgaria, there are many scholars and postdocs and also PhDs who are working on these issues. So my idea is like to contribute to this kind of field of studies. And I think that could be also interesting because I'm neither from Bulgaria, I'm not Bulgarian, nor from those kind of communities. So, I can also bring outside the discourse outside Bulgaria, because at the end of the day, we started to talk about this kind of dichotomy between, the European discourse and something that is not yet introduced into the European discourse. So if I can contribute to it, I'm willing to do it.
In your ideal world, would you go back to Italy and kind of work on the subaltern in Italy, maybe how World War II was thought about in a post-memory way, or Italy's contribution?
I don't know actually, and especially because we're living under a pandemic, I think that our projects have been somehow falling apart. But I'm very happy, for instance, to be here. I was finishing my PhD and I got this opportunity to come here to keep working, even though we live under pandemic restrictions and, it's complicated for all of us. But in general, I don't know what the future would be. I'm more oriented to work on a daily basis and then to see. Because
I feel like we create the future.
Yeah.
So we are the ones who determine.
Definitely. Like you are the own maker of your future. Definitely. This is what it is. And maybe long-term projects they cannot find space in the future because I think that the pandemic has taught us that thinking about the future too much when the present is uncertain. I think that we need to fix the present in order to get prepared for the future, whatever the future will be.